Hi, I'm Cassidy Quistorf, Executive Director of Klamath Film, and you just watched We're Still Here, the termination and restoration of the Klamath Tribes. With me today is Wahoo Films team members Michelle Alvarado and Henry Kim, and we also have Abby Hall, who was a part of the Senate Bill 13 ad hoc committee to bring these films into life and for educational purposes. Thank you so much all for being here with me today.
Thank you for having us.
So Abby, would you mind telling us a little bit about the story of how these films kind of came to life and the purpose and just the story of how this all came about?
Of course. Oregon passed Senate Bill 13, which is titled Tribal History, Shared History. And it requires that public educators, K through 12, teach Oregon tribal history. And so this is a big deal for Native people because all of us went to school and you never learned your history. And that really impacts the way you view yourself, your family, your tribe, your community. And so to have this happen at such a large level was amazing for us. And then the Oregon Department of Education even took it a step further. They gave the money directly to the tribes and said, you write your history. Instead of how history's always been written for Native people, not by Native people. And so it was a great opportunity for the Klamath Tribes and the other 9 federally recognized tribes in Oregon to own our history and tell our story. And so that's what we got to do. We had a Senate Bill 13 ad hoc committee that was appointed by Chairman Gentry. We had several tribal council members on that committee and people from all over education, people located there in Chiloquin in Central Oregon. We had some, that were doing PhD programs at U of O. We even had a tribal council member or a tribal member who was in Colorado participating. And all of us, we had this fundamental goal of education's important, and this is our chance to get our history into the schools. And so anybody that's been an educator knows you can tell students stuff over and over and over, but if you show them, they will actually remember. And if you can tell them a story, they will remember the story, not the dates and the statistics and all the numbers, but they'll remember a story of, this is what termination felt like. Or when I was dropped off at boarding school, this is what happened. And not anybody can tell those stories. And so we had seen work that Wahoo had done with other tribes throughout Oregon, and they knew how to respectfully tell those stories. And so it was an honor and a privilege to be able to tell that history, but then to find partners and allies who could tell that story with the reverence that it needed to be told was truly a blessing on both sides. And so that's where the films came to be. And I would like to say that we planned this out and it was all organized, but we were down to about a 6-month crunch. And we hit it hard in February of 2020, or was it 2021? And our curriculum was due in June. And we did all of our interviews in July. And we focused on our tribal elders, because nothing like a pandemic makes you say, you know what? You always say you want to hear what the elders say, and our elders were passing away. And so we did 2 days straight of elder interviews in Chiloquin, and it was amazing. And then that's where the voice of these videos came from. And so that's kind of the history. Then we got to add in the videos to the curriculum. And so we told the history and then we got to show it to students. And now they're all actually live on the Oregon Department of Education's webpage with the curriculum and the videos. And so it was a very empowering thing all the way around.
That's a remarkable story. And I mean, the stories itself that are being told are also remarkable and have been so looked over for so long. So it's just wonderful to be seeing these coming to life as, tragic and awful as they are moving forward and seeing this restoration. And so what has the reception been like with the schools or with the curriculum?
Unfortunately, it took about a year. The curriculum was just posted within the last month to the Oregon Department of Education's webpage. And so even though everything was done and ready to go, it took a long time. But our views just through the Tribes webpage have well over 5,000 hits on the 3 videos that we did. And so we did the videos to accompany the curriculum, and the videos far have outpaced the curriculum.
Wow.
And so it's been amazing. And then the nation has finally learned or decided to acknowledge the story of the boarding schools. And so that's being acknowledged here in the United States and abroad, especially with what's happening in Canada and, the finding of these bodies. And, over 10,000 bodies have been found of Indigenous people, mostly in Canada, but now they're actually looking in the United States. And so this boarding school story really resonated with people because it was coming out at a national level. And then here we had people, survivors in our videos. And they're looking at federal Indian boarding schools, but we got to tell the story of, the St. Mary's boarding school in Albany that people didn't know. Nobody knew that that was there. And you had a survivor that tells you their story, and it brings it home. It brings it home to Oregon. And so I think the timing of it was really instrumental in that it was a national story, but here's what it looked like locally. Here's the words of the people that survived. And so, the videos have far outpaced the curriculum, but I think the curriculum is going to catch up because we tried to make it very accessible to teachers, written by teachers for teachers. And then you have the tools of, these 8-minute videos or 7-minute videos that tell that story and reiterate what happened on a personal level.
Right. And with both films, it seems like it's pretty important to end on this, hopeful and resilient note of the tribes and just saying, we're still here. And I think that's so beautiful and really ties it together. But how important was that for the film to end on that hopeful and resilient note?
I'm really glad that you recognize that we did end on that note. The more you learn about Native history and the accurate history, you could just see Native people as completely defeated and of the erasure of the culture. And the fact is, everything that was done for hundreds of years, they've tried to forcefully assimilate Native people and kill the culture. And all you have to do is look around the Native communities and see that they failed. They threw everything they had at Native tribes and it failed. We are still here. And so when Jeff Mitchell says that in the video, he nailed it. You threw everything you had. You literally terminated us. And we're working towards full restoration. And we are here and acknowledge that. And, we do focus, a lot of people focus on the generational trauma that is in Native communities. And that's a real thing, but they fail to recognize the generational resistance and resilience. That has never gone away. And so I think you need to see the impact of the legislative policies on the people and what it's done to people, but acknowledge that it does not define us. And that we are still here. We are literally the grandchildren of the survivors. And so you got to know that you have that in your DNA as well. And so we wanted to do that, not just for the Native people who are hearing their first history, maybe for the first time, to know this is the strength you come from, but for non-Native people to know, oh, this is actually what happened to them. This is what these policies were. And they survived it. And so it is a strength of pride for Native people and a spreading of awareness for non-Natives.
Absolutely. And that's a great kind of leading into my next question. What do you hope non-Native people take away from these films?
That's a great question.
Maybe not even
understanding of what truly happened. The boarding school piece, you want educators to maybe understand why Native students, Native parents, Native grandparents are hesitancy of the institution of education. When you realize the abuse that Native children have been through, literally stolen, and then abused in manners that we can't fathom, And then you wonder, well, how come parents don't show up to the PTA? You know, you understand that there's a history related to that and that things need to be overcome. And so maybe special outreach programs. And then for the non-native people with the termination policy, you know, there's a lot of misconceptions as to why did that happen. And, you know, they voted to sell their land. And that wasn't the case. You know, they didn't have a choice. There was either remain a member of a private corporation or get a money handout. Remaining a tribe was not an option. And people don't understand that there was two bad choices, neither of which were let's remain a tribe and leave us alone. Leave us with our reservation and our resources. And that was not an option. And so for non-natives to understand that was a huge thing. And then that for the termination restoration film, that this did not happen a long time ago. This happened in 1954, took through 1960s, early 1960s. And that's within, you know, your parents' lifetime for most of these students. And they think that, you know, bad things happen to natives or, you know, a long time ago, a pre-contact and a contact. And it's like, no, this happened in, you know, recent history. And the boarding schools didn't start closing until 1970. That's your grandparents' generation to kind of bring that history forward. And it didn't happen far away. It happened here in our community. And so I think that's kind of the things, the hopes that we want. And then just a second.
Oh, you're muted.
You're still muted.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
I have a lot going on, kids and dogs and husbands. Oh, just one husband. Sorry, not the plural of the husbands. But good times. If that isn't the story of Zoom.
Right, absolutely.
So,
and sometimes
I was getting long-winded anyways. I needed to be cut off.
Right. Oh no, not at all.
That's good.
But you know, it's a great point you bring up about how recently this history has happened and occurred. And I think that's what struck out to me most in the films was like, you know, one of the interviewees, one of the Klamath tribal members is saying it took her a long time to learn how to hug and how to be affectionate and and now she hugs her children every chance she gets when, you know, they're around. And I just thought it was beautiful, but also just so striking to see how recently all this occurred and still affects people today, like you were mentioning with the generational trauma. So, yeah.
Well, and one thing that wasn't mentioned in those interviews, but one of the grandchildren was like, you know, we never understood.
Oh, Gabby, we lost her.
The bed wasn't made perfect. And it was because they would be beaten if their bed wasn't made perfect. If something was amiss, they were beaten. And so that had been instilled into them that was normal behavior. That's how children needed to behave. And I can imagine growing up feeling that.
Right.
That institutional.
Okay. So you were saying, it cut out right at the very beginning, but you were saying that they had been trained as a kid to always have a clean room, and then they instilled that also in their children, right?
Yeah, and it was basically, it was a sin to not have a clean room, and that sort of thing. And so it just shows how institutionalized that behavior became, and
Absolutely.
You know.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Michelle and Henry, what was it kind of like using or choosing different creative tools to utilize to tell these stories? Like, for instance, the animation used in the boarding schools film. What was kind of those creative processes like?
Yeah, the animation, actually, we realized the power of these stories. The emotion really did need some visual, and obviously being historical stories, we didn't have visuals. In fact, we ended up scanning and asking the local museum to help us scan a lot of imagery, just to find the visuals to help tell the story. It was actually quite a bit of time trying to find those visuals. And so we decided that adding some animation would hopefully bring the situation more realistic for the viewer. And I feel like it did. It really gives you more of a feeling of what they went through. And thankfully, they're such good there's such good storytellers too. You really can feel what happened.
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
Can I comment on that right quick?
Yeah, please, Abby.
So because we were terminated, the Bureau of Indian Affairs took all of our records at the time of termination. And so we didn't have a map. We didn't have an image. We didn't have a list of people that attended boarding schools. We had no information. And so, the people at Wahoo Films are like, okay, where's the asset? And it was just a complete void. And you don't understand how to tell your history when literally it was terminated. It was wiped out, and we couldn't get into federal archives because it was COVID. And then again, we came to find out they don't even have any of our documents. And so we believe they were destroyed. And so to not even have your own likeness to tell your story, to not have a list of, here's the list of people that went to boarding school. And at the end, we run those names, and that list of names was literally me running around with a clipboard and emailing people. And I was able to get into some archives at Carlisle. But the National Healing Coalition of Boarding Schools, they did not have a list. Cami Horton at OPB was able to do some research for the Klamath Indian Agency School, but those records don't exist because this history has not been told. And when we show that, it was actually really cool because me, Henry, and Michelle all got to be together the first time we showed the boarding school video to an audience. And somebody's like, it just keeps going and going. And you could hear people's breath catch. And after they said that and the video was over, I said, we are a small tribe, and that is not a complete list. And so you just have no clue on a national level, how big is that list of people that attended those boarding schools, and for the history to not be there to tap into to find out who went. It was literally, I know grandma went during this, I knew my grandma had gone to high school, but I didn't know that Canyonville Bible Academy was a boarding school. So even about my own grandma, I found out, oh, that was a boarding school. And other people, that's how we did it during the interviews. I was like, okay, what was your auntie's name? And she went where? And so that was how that list was made. But that was something that Wahoo was really surprised about because, they're used to going into archives and finding information, and they could speak to one having to train me on what an asset was. And then once I figured out what that was, just to be like, nope, there's nothing. We would email our tribal membership and be like, does anybody have a picture of their grandparents in boarding school? And that's where those images came from, because the history hadn't been written or compiled. And so that was an interesting thing. I felt really bad for Wahoo. None of us knew that it was such a huge gap of zero information.
That was one of the most pivotal moments through the journey of the filmmaking process, was the weeks and months we spent researching the archival history and having that aha moment, like, holy cow, this was deliberately erased from the records, and just to have to go back and try to find it. And we hope we did honor and justice to that list. And, we just spent time to make sure we get everyone's name right. And it was such a duality of emotion having that Don Wood song, to Remember Me. And the lyrics of that song, it's like, when the sun comes up in the morning sky, there I will be, soaring with the eagle so high, feeling free. And it's just bringing that dual emotion of loss, but prevailing hope. And just honoring and remembering those names.
Absolutely. I mean, it sounds like it's such a, and you can see it in the film, this community-based, like, grassroots. I mean, y'all weren't just a part of telling history, but a part of making it by bringing those names together and putting them all on the screen for the first time in this in memoriam, beautiful tribute and wall. And as you were saying, that song in the background, I mean, it's just moving. And so major congratulations to everyone involved for doing that hard work and bringing those names to life and to light. So yeah, it was absolutely moving. I was going to ask about the list at the end, and it just really brings it home, I feel like, at the end.
Would make me cry, Henry.
I had one question about, the relationship with the land, and this is something that has been taken away from the Klamath tribes and from Modoc and Yahuskin tribes and traditional indigenous people on our lands. And you can see the degradation in the Klamath Basin itself. Abby, do you have any feelings or vision forward for this relationship with the land and moving forward? That's kind of a huge question. And, if there's nothing specific to say, but I just love that bringing the relationship with the land to life.
We went into the project knowing that we wanted to do boarding schools and termination because of the number of elders that were passing away. And we filmed for these videos on July 15th and 16th, 14th, 15th, and 16th. Showed up to our video filming, and that was the bootleg fire. And you could hear the anger in the elders when we spoke of termination, and the hurt when we spoke of boarding schools. And what broke every single one of them was the fire. And the land was burning. And we almost canceled the interviews because we didn't want our elders there breathing in the smoke. Is how bad it was. And it was about 200,000 acres, I think, when we started. It had a huge impact on the videos because we had lost the land in termination. But as my Aunt Lorraine says in the end of one of that, even though it's no longer ours, or even though you no longer claim it as ours, it's still ours. We still consider that land ours. We're going out on our reservation. And our reservation was burning. And so it put a weight on our elders because they're the ones that knew it. One of the prevailing things that we heard over and over was the change at the time of termination. And one of the things that kind of really talked about the change was no longer having access to the land and fences coming up because there had never been fences. And that connection to the land, every single elder talked about it, whether it was hunting, fishing, gathering, and then passing those traits on to their grandchildren. But to have the land burning around us while we were filming just brought an extra weight to the interviews. And so we ended up during our third video on Heal the Land, Heal the People. And we didn't plan to do that. And we didn't ask the right questions, get the video where we wanted it to go. But we said, we'll just see what's important to the elders. And land's always, important to the elder or to all Native people. But it was so important at that time because it was all burning up. And the year before, we had the 242 fire, which burnt up our old Klamath Tribal agency, Indian agency. And so the role of fire and natural resources was just all around us. You couldn't get away from it. You could literally smell it in the air. And that's when every single person's voice would crack, is when they got to the fire. And so I think we believe that we want the land restored, and having it burn up in front of us 2 years in a row showed that there had been mismanagement of resources. And so a full restoration of the tribe and the people is a restoration of the land as well. And how we will get there, will we get there? I'm not sure how we'll get there, but I do believe it's the collective goal of every Klamath tribal member to have that land restored. And I know tribal council works towards that goal every day. But if we take our guidance from our elders, you could hear it, and all of them talking about how hard it was to lose the land through termination, and then how hard it was to lose the land through fire and the resources. And so that was really tough. It was tough to hear because, they would crack and then everybody in the audience would crack. But that was clearly, they could talk about the abuse of the boarding school, the loss of termination, and they could handle all of that. It wasn't until they got to the fire that they couldn't handle it anymore. And so I think it just kind of shows how important the land is to people. And we had half of our elders for these interviews came from out of the area. And almost every single person that came from out of the area brought grandchildren with them. Because it was, you're returning home, you're going to the homeland, and it doesn't matter how far you get, it always calls you back. And so I thought that was really cool. There was one, he's probably 15, and an iPhone only has a certain amount of storage on it. And this 15-year-old recorded the whole entire hour of his grandma's interview. And she was so excited to bring him back and show him around and stuff. And I was just like, that shows the value of this interview to that 15-year-old kid to use a whole hour of iPhone space, recording grandma's interview and stuff. And so I think even when we left the land, because a lot of people did leave the land because of termination and stuff. And so to see it call them back and then to come back and see, a lot of them had driven by the Indian agency and they're like, I told them how we used to go to meetings here. And, we tried to film there because I told Wahoo, I'm like, we can't have a film without the Indian agency there. But it was just ash, there wasn't, you could kind of see some sidewalks. They tried to put it in for me because I told them we couldn't do a film without it. But it was ash and stuff. And so who knows, maybe in the future we'll have some, and that was one thing we really wanted was old images of the Indian agency. And that was something that you couldn't find. And so we wanted to do old images and then kind of morph it into the fire and then all the new buildings that the tribe is building, like the community center, the wellness center, the admin and health buildings, because we are rebuilding from the rubble of the fire, we shall rise. But you need a land base for that when it comes to natural resources, fish, deer, gathering. You need a land base. And right now we have no control really over the land base. Not that we're not in partnership with the Forest Service and different organizations, but that land base is instrumental to doing that. And so that uninvited guest of the fires did have a huge impact on the interviews, I think. And it definitely gave us our third video.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing, Abby, for your time today. Michelle and Henry, thank you so much for sharing this and bringing the story to Klamath Independent Film Festival. We're absolutely honored to be showing it. And is there any final thoughts that any of y'all would like to say before we end our Q&A today? Oh, Henry, you're muted.
If you want to watch that third video, you can go to klamathtribes.org, and under the news tab, we'll have all the videos and more content for you if you want to find out more information. And also, if you want to contribute funding to the tribes to help with their restoration work, they've partnered with Seeding Justice through the AMBO Fund, and more details can be found on their website as well.
Great. Well, thank you so much again, everyone. Oh, Michelle, did you have anything else to say? Or
I just wanted to thank the Klamath Falls Independent Film Festival for giving us a chance to share these films. So thank you guys as well.
Yeah, I want to thank you as well. We wrote these lessons for the state and for state educators, but I think where they're most important is in the Klamath Basin, because hopefully through education we can spread awareness and understanding. And then to Wahoo Films, I do not think just anybody can come in and tell these stories, and that they do it with such a grace and a humbleness and a respectfulness for the culture, has just been very beneficial to the tribe. And so we thank Wahoo and the film festival for acknowledging this, to be able to tell our history and then to have it acknowledged as important is a fantastic feeling. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Well, we're honored to be showing it, and thank you again so much for sharing this story.
And one last thought.
Yes.
I know Abby was just a Senate Bill 13 ad hoc committee member. However, in our hearts, she was a co-producer on the whole endeavor, and like our primary researcher, our primary advocate, and without her, these stories wouldn't have came to life.
Kudos, Abby.
Thank you.